Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're doing a quick 10-minute documentary-style deep dive into a single year that violently shifted the tectonic plates of human history. We're talking about 1492. We are looking at a figure whose name is deeply etched into the very fabric of the modern era. But, and here's the really crazy part, his greatest achievement was actually a colossal, historically unprecedented mistake. Christopher Columbus. He set out to find the East, crashed right into the West, and inadvertently became the architect of the world as we know it today. It's a story of absolute obsession, huge hubris, and a legacy that continues to define our globe. So let's trace exactly how it all unfolded.
Okay, so take a look at this quote right here from his diary. He wrote this right when he arrived in 1492, and it reveals this striking, almost naive initial optimism. "We might form great friendship," he wrote. He was completely convinced that he was just encountering people on the remote outskirts of the Asian continent. It was this brief, fleeting moment where two totally distinct worlds met for the very first time. But to truly understand how this ambitious navigator from Genoa ended up standing on a beach in the Bahamas, claiming land for Spain and writing these specific words, well, we got to rewind the clock a bit. We need to look at the exact origins of his obsession.
So before he was the explorer who completely redefined the map, Columbus was just a boy born in Genoa, Italy in 1451. He wasn't born into royalty, he wasn't backed by crazy wealth. Actually, his dad was just a humble wool weaver who also ran a cheese stand. Picture this young kid spending hours at the bustling harbor of Genoa, breathing in the salt air, watching merchant ships disappear over the horizon, and just eating up sailors' tales of spices, gold, and distant lands. Obviously, that boy grew up and took to the sea himself. His early adult life was all about constant movement, maritime trade, and gritty survival, which eventually pushed him to Castile, Spain. And that's where in 1486, he would confidently pitch his grand, audacious idea to Queen Isabella.
But you have to understand, Columbus wasn't just a seasoned sailor. He was a fiercely obsessed, mostly self-educated theorist. He was a voracious reader. He just devoured the travel logs of Marco Polo, the ancient geographic theories of Ptolemy, and Pliny's natural history. If you were to open his personal copies of these books today, you'd see the margins completely stuffed with hundreds of his handwritten notes in Latin. To him, these weren't just books, they were absolute blueprints. They fueled this fanatical obsession with finding a new, super lucrative western sea passage to the rich spice trade of the East Indies. Because, with the Silk Road basically closed off by the Ottoman Empire, Europe desperately needed a new route to Asia. And Columbus convinced himself, through sheer willpower and, let's be honest, very selective reading, that the fastest way east was to sail west.
And that sheer willpower, it was forged in absolute desperation. In August 1476, while he was sailing on a Genoese trading fleet, his convoy was brutally attacked. His ship caught fire and literally sank off the coast of Portugal. But Columbus didn't drown. Instead, he grabbed onto a piece of floating debris and swam 6 agonizing miles to the Portuguese shore. 6 miles! That incredible survival instinct, that total refusal to just sink, really defined his entire character. It's that exact same relentless persistence he'd use later to tirelessly lobby the royal courts of Europe for years, refusing to take no for an answer until the Spanish Catholic monarchs finally agreed to fund his radical trip.
Now, his expectation was incredibly straightforward: secure a direct, wealthy trade route to Asia. But his underlying math was fundamentally, historically, flawed. Columbus severely underestimated the true size of the Earth. He thought the distance to Japan was just a mere fraction of what it actually is. So, instead of arriving in the East Indies to trade for spices, the reality was that on October 12, 1492, his ships bumped into a completely unknown landmass. He entirely failed his original mission. Yet, by making that catastrophic navigational error, he unwittingly ended the pre-Columbian era, forever bridging the old world and the new.
And the sheer hubris of this miscalculation gave us one of history's most enduring misnomers. Columbus was so deeply, unshakably convinced that he was charting islands just off the coast of Asia that he confidently called the indigenous peoples he encountered Indios, or Indians. Even though he was literally thousands and thousands of miles away from India, his absolute certainty in his own faulty math birthed the term that has persisted globally for centuries. He planted that Spanish flag completely oblivious to the staggering reality that he was actually standing on the edge of the Americas.
That history-making first expedition was incredibly tense right from the moment they raised the anchors. In August 1492, he departs Spain with 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. For weeks, they're just sailing into the terrifying unknown. The tension on those wooden decks was intense. The crew was on the absolute edge of mutiny, terrified they'd never see home again. But in October, they finally spot land, stepping onto an island the native inhabitants called Guanahani in the Bahamas. By early 1493, Columbus makes a pivotal return to Spain, bringing back gold, parrots, and captured native people to present to the crown. Word of his shocking discovery spread like a viral contagion across Europe, thanks to the newly invented printing press. The isolation of the Americas was officially, irreversibly over.
Now, the historical record of what followed his discovery is profoundly dark. Appointed as the governor of the Indies, his subsequent administration in Hispaniola was defined by severe, systematic brutality. The historical sources are very clear on this, detailing the forced labor and enslavement of the native populations under his command. Compounded by the introduction of devastating Old World diseases like smallpox, which the natives had absolutely zero biological immunity to, this period triggered a massive depopulation of the Taino and other indigenous groups, which is often categorized by modern historians as a genocide. His governance was ultimately considered such a catastrophic failure, even by his Spanish contemporaries, that in 1500, a royal commissioner actually arrested Columbus and his brothers, stripped him of his post, and shipped the famed explorer back to Spain in chains.
Zooming out, the permanent, enduring legacy of these voyages was a massive biological explosion known today as the Columbian Exchange. This wasn't just a political clash of empires, it was a wholesale terraforming of the globe. The Old World introduced horses, wheat, and tragically lethal diseases to the Americas. In return, the New World sent back potatoes, maize, and tomatoes. Think about why this matters to you today. If you love tomatoes in a rich Italian pasta or potatoes in classic European dishes, you are tasting the direct result of this exact historical moment. These new crops utterly revolutionized European diets and triggered massive global population booms. This vast transfer of life is widely cited by historians as the true, messy beginning of the modern era.
But for Columbus the man, the final chapters of his life were grueling. His fourth and final voyage was pretty much an apocalyptic disaster. Between 1503 and 1504, Columbus and his crew found themselves shipwrecked and marooned on the island of Jamaica for over a year. Picture this harrowing scene. The hulls of his ships are literally rotting away. His starving men are engaged in violent infighting, he's facing hostile native revolts, and their resources are entirely gone. It was only in June 1504 that a tiny rescue caravel from Hispaniola finally showed up on the horizon. Broken and exhausted by that whole nightmare, Columbus sailed back to Europe, leaving the Americas behind forever.
And that brings us to the bitter, tragic irony of his end. On May 20, 1506, Christopher Columbus dies in Valladolid, Spain, at the age of 54. But what is truly staggering is his state of mind at the very end. He died genuinely believing his life's work had been a massive, embarrassing failure. Because he never found that fabled western sea route to the spices of Asia, he considered himself a ruined man. He passed away 14 years before Ferdinand Magellan would finally navigate the route to the Pacific Ocean, and years before Hernán Cortés would lay claim to the incomprehensible wealth of the Aztec Empire. Columbus died completely and utterly unaware of the staggering scale of the New World he had actually unlocked.
So, this leaves us grappling with a complex, unavoidable duality. Did Columbus succeed by failing? Did he unlock the modern, interconnected world through a sheer mathematical error and an iron will? Or is his historical legacy forever defined by the unimaginable devastation, exploitation, and enslavement that immediately followed in his wake? He remains a visionary navigator who stubbornly refused to see what was right in front of him, yet inadvertently changed the map of the world forever. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the past, and I'll see you in the next one.